Well, I think that Scrutiny started out by being about Tennessee, and it's wound up being about the three of us, and that it's in one way it's about the 10 seasons of life, which form a loop, and in this respect, since it's an interactive book, the looping between the seasons of life can be done in a way that one couldn't really live them otherwise.
It's about history. It's a lot about time and about different kinds of people's experience of time and the passing of life and the regeneration of life.
I've put some people in front of it. They sat down and saw the story right through to the end. Other people look at it and find it's beautiful, it's mysterious, they have no idea what's going on, but after looking at it again and again, they start picking up and start seeing a lot more in it, which is something I've always felt about Tennessee's work, is that you can keep going into it and seeing more.
Yeah, there is a storyline to this piece, but it's more of a story that's built from association, more like a poem where there's many elements, fragments, and glimpses of things that, when put together, in the end create a story, but everyone interprets it differently, and my take on it, I can see the story clearly, but someone else has a response to it that is just as valid and interesting as mine. I got a call from someone just a couple of days ago who asked me if I had any children, and I said no, and she was quite surprised because the piece was so reminiscent of her experience of giving birth.
I feel, in the words of the recently departed video artist Juan Downey, that art is in fact about information withheld, and that no matter how much you tell, there's always something that's withheld, and that's the mystery that's decoded by the careful reader, each in their own way, bringing themselves to complete the picture.
Because it's about the great mysteries, and we can only, we have our own readings of what's going in there, but we're drawing from images that come loaded with meaning and loaded with mystery.
If things are a total mystery, there's nothing that someone can relate to, and so there has to be a way, something recognizable, or a map, or something familiar that someone can enter a mystery with.
I very consciously want to incorporate references to other cultures. If it was all about, if all the images were drawn from North American sources, it would have a very different feel. I'm most gratified when I see people who have never touched a computer before, or who don't like computers, and have this revelation that, hey, something that appeals to me is on this machine.
My work comes from ideas that then compel me to create, so that if I start with a concept, I'm a conceptualist at heart, and in that way also a ritualist. I think in terms of the ritual context of any piece. I think that it exists within a framework, whether the framework is to articulate a form or an idea, or to illuminate an occasion, to, in this case, create an extra dimension in the reading of a visual collage and its movieization. But for me, the music doesn't exist until it is burst into sound, and can take on a life of its own. Well, I started out putting together an image of how the sound should be, working with the already in place sound ideas that Jim and Tennessee had worked with. They had already assembled language, and in a number of cases sound effects and music-like things, which gave the piece its flavor. In fact, I liked their work very much, and it was based on liking the way they were thinking about sound that I felt that, well, if they wanted to work with me, I would definitely like to work with them. So the first thing was establishing kind of an overall central point to begin from, and then the next move was to begin to speculate on what kind of sound might hold the whole piece together, and to evolve a structure of what you would call what we've called the ambiences of each page. And we came up with 3 levels of scoring, which enabled us to think about how it all fit together. Each page has its own basic sound, which is a little different seen in the light of the sun as opposed to the light of the moon. And then when you start rolling over points, you have what we call hotspots, and that mouse rolling, which creates sound, would give sounds that added up on top of, usually on top of the ambient sound. And then if you clicked on points, then you would go into sections that were sequences. And I think that for me it was a bit of an education to find out the dynamics of what would really work on each level of sound. I'd say that in terms of fashioning cues for collaboration, that I work very well with the last minute. I like to wait until it's really gestated, until it has to get done, and then I like to work through the night and work that way because the phone doesn't ring.
I've been collecting Tennessee's work almost as long as I've known her. I was always impressed with how every time I look at one of her pieces, I see something new in it. I've also thought that the layering of imagery she does and the way things transform from one thing to another and images travel in sequences was something that would make a good marriage with the possibilities of the computer.
Jim was kind of, I can say nagging, but had been asked frequently to do some work on the computer with him, and I resisted. So that's how I remember it. And
Persistence
persisted. Then I started to play around with a morphing program for one day, and that was instant results of getting a transition to happen, which was very similar to the kind of work I was doing, which was starting from one beginning image to another and filling in by drawing the in-between, not cartoon, but just this transformation of maybe a seed to a plant, or and so then the results were very fascinating and got hooked.
It was the New Voices, New Visions contest which spurred us on. It gave us a deadline to say, all right, let's see what we can do for that. And worked on it for about 6 months and came to a particular point in it, and we thought it was, we had proved that we could do something really interesting, and said, all right, now the next thing to do is to finish it.
Well, one thing I like about working with Jim is his stamina and his tenacity in sticking with it, and has a physical energy to really work long hours. And we have different strengths, and there's overlap, but then we have very different, we bring different things to the piece, and it's been a great compliment.
Well, our collaboration is, we'll constantly have our fingers in each other's cookie jars, and it's sometimes quite literally. I was working on a morph about milkweed pods. Milkweed was out of season, so I couldn't find any milkweeds to scan. So when I was cooking okra for dinner one night, and I said, that looks kind of like milkweed. Maybe I can scan it and then fake it in Photoshop. And it didn't work out to be useful for my purposes. But Tennessee came by and said, oh, look at that! And now we have okra sprouting through all the After Effects movies that Tennessee's made since.
One way that Jim works very different than me is that he has an idea that he's thought of, and he carries it. He develops a plan for that, and he acquires the proper pictures, and he fulfills this the idea that he had, and he sticks with that. And I tend to just go with what's happening, and from the images, what is stimulated in me at the time, and then something gets built from that.
And there's a nice little microcosm on the fourth scene where there's a female figure on the left and on the right, and a male figure on the left. And about a month after Tennessee first started working with the computer, she came back with this beautiful morph of women, various images of women changing one to the next. And some months later, I get working with Tennessee and checking various things at various times with her, produced sort of the male response of the male gaze over the ages, looking looking across at the female figure. And in the meantime, we had worked out together this Dionysus Greek vase moving across, bubbles moving across the screen. A project like this somebody has to, even though it's an intense, intimate collaboration, somebody has to be the ultimate arbiter of what goes in, what goes out, what doesn't. In this project, that's Tennessee. What kind of equipment did we use? Well, for the first year of the project, we worked with a 2CI with 8 megs RAM, a black and white PowerBook. In recent months, both Tennessee and Charlie have gotten PowerMax, but I'm still working out of my PowerBook. A director, which is the authoring system we're using here, which is at this point in time the most commonly used multimedia authoring system, uses the metaphor that you, the creator, are the director, as a film or theater director would be. The screen is the stage, and things like sounds and QuickTime movies and graphics are your cast, and you can direct the cast to do whatever you want on the stage, move around, play at certain points in sequence. The sprite cursor technique is something I've been working with in my interactive designs for a long time. This is the first time that I'm really been able to utilize it. That's where you, instead of using the little system arrow key, which is often so you use by default, and when you think of it, that is your representation in the world, and it's a little computery element. It doesn't, I think it's much more powerful to have a graphic that comes from the world that you're exploring, because that sort of pulls you in. And on top of that, since we can move change the sprite and have it be different things in different situations, there's a lot of information about what you can do that's built into the changing cursor. A sprite, I'm not sure why it's called a sprite. It may be an allusion to its sprightliness, or it's maybe it's like a little fairy that comes and goes as you in the night.
One of my favorite spots with the sound is on this page where these two Mayan, this Mayan couple page, or scene 5, I think it is, on the dark side. It's great, this music, this drumming, and it's kind of building, just every time, I want to dance every time I hear it.
I guess an overall favorite thing, which is that I suppose that I was impressed from the very start with the idea of a collage going 4-dimensional. And the fact that we can start with pages, and that by using interactive techniques, the collage can expand in 4 dimensions into sound and into image and retain its integrity. This is extraordinary for me. I mean, it's as though you can apply the principle of the kaleidoscope to a handmade book, and no matter how you shift the pieces, the maker has made them so that they all make sense. So that's a big thing. And then on a micro level, there's a scene where a little character at the end of a movie just disappears off, dances off to the right and dances off stage. And that's the one moment where the off stage is sort of recognized. And I think that's that's my favorite whimsy.
My favorite spot is always what was just put in yesterday, particularly if it works. But right now, I particularly like the seasons passing.
And then there's this graphic scene that I like. Starts with this. It's on the pregnant page, and the pregnant female these sort of caretakers come down, and it's raining, and she laughs, and then she morphs into this vase, and then the vase turns into some stairs, and going into a vase, and then this woman holding a bowl comes, and then this guy is like in a desperate state, and then it turns back into the bowl, and then it's kind of a winter scene. I love that sequence.
Well, I find it enormously fun to know that anything that happens in my life, or anything that I come across, could, and find its way into this piece.
The ideas have matured quite a lot, and for instance, in this story, there's a guy, and he has a horse head, and it's his experience of going out and finding a part of himself that he's neglected, the more feminine aspects of himself.
So I've been working in interactive design for about 12 years now. It started with a series of books for which I designed the interactive structure. These are reader-active books. We did Verbatim, kind of book where you come to the end of a chapter and you're given a choice about which way to go next. It's for 9 to 12-year-olds about history. And I wrote, as I say, I designed the interactive structure for this and I wrote the first few titles. And struggling to make an interactive experience happen on the page, I was working on my first personal computer to write them, and at the same time playing some of the early computer games, and it became clear that the computer was a much more powerful place to do this kind of storytelling. But I fell in love with the interactive idea, and sort of that's been my career ever since. Another milestone is I wrote text adventures with Ron Martinez and Transfiction Systems. This was Star Trek: The Promethean Prophecy, something we did for Simon & Schuster software, and I got to write dialogue for Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk. And then right after that, I had become very involved in the what's called the Central American Solidarity Movement. I was rather incensed at the policies of the Reagan administration towards Central America, and went down to visit my brother who was a journalist living at the time in Nicaragua, and found people would come up and very naively say, well, why don't you go back to America and tell people what you see here? And they had this very touching faith in North American democracy, the idea that if enough people told enough other people that somehow the government would change its policies. And here I was working with these interactive tools, which I've always recognized are very powerful ways to communicate complex ideas. And I said, why don't I put these two parts of my life together? And that was the genesis of Hidden Agenda, which is a simulation of politics in Central America that puts you in the role of a presidente of a mythical Central American country. And it's a dramatic simulation, and that all the choices you have are given you by characters that represent different classes or groups or ambassadors of other countries. And as you make choices, the world changes, and you start out with a kind of generic country, and as you make choices, the country can start to look like Nicaragua in the 80s. The other choices you can make the country look a lot like El Salvador during the same period. It's been used on many different levels, which I always found gratifying. It's been used in high schools, universities, and at the State Department by the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington for training diplomats and representative of the FBI, the CIA, and the DEA. So how does the creative process work?
In Jim Gasparini.
Jim Gasparini. It becomes different. It's like different things, and sometimes it's the awareness of a coding technique. I think if I hadn't known about how in Director there's a technique called trails, where you leave an image on the screen and then you can wipe it off. And if I hadn't been aware of that technique, it would never have occurred to me to have the baby's hand wipe off the stars. And other times it's an idea. I have this idea of the moon, of doing the moon, all the cycles of the moon as one little movie. And so I went out and found an old book with a series of pictures of the moon and made a morph out of that. Some of the things that I think about a lot while doing it, I think a lot about the mystery of dual existence, and material and spiritual. Living in the question of God, as William Barrett says in an explication of Immanuel Kant.
I'd just like to say that the bowler hat is the yarmulke of Dada.
Hello, I'm Jim. Welcome to my secret world.
Speaking of mothers, since I was pretty small, my mom always thought I'd be an artist, and I resisted, I believe. Thought I would be a farmer or a veterinarian or a horseback rider, but she was right. Wasn't she?
This is an example of where some of the images come from in Scrutiny. This is a book that I found in the Marché de Clignancourt outside Paris. It's an old engineering publication from 1866.
There's an object that we scanned in, or many objects. This appears in a couple of discrete places.
It's an old pipe. And my grandfather's watch?
Time, that's a pretty big subject in this piece. There's a lot of clock sounds and passing of time and what is time, history, and chains.
Here's some okra that took a detour through a scanner on its way to dinner. Flaubert said that the world exists to be put into a novel. The world exists today to be put into a CD-ROM.
The title, Scrutiny in the Great Round, I think of scrutinizing in the great round of life, and it's the womb, the seasons passing, cycles of death and birth, and wedding rings and round tables and eyes, mandalas. Scrutiny in the Great Round is the title of an artist book that I made. I made an edition of 22 handmade books. It took 11 months to put these books together. It's an accordion fold. There's a Xerox collage and paint, and each page is heavily hand-worked with wrinkling and washing and layering of mediums. The CD has evolved from this book. Jim and I began about 1.5 years ago using the images from this book, the 12 scenes in it, and going into more depth in the details of these pages. It has to do with the relationship between the body and the intellect and the rational and the instinctual, masculine and the feminine, and discovery and marriage and birth and so on. I like to call it a visual narrative. The CD project went off into new territory, including sounds and moving images and rhythms, and having numerous levels of parallel scenes, and the introduction of very fluid interactivity between the scenes, which creates another means of experiencing this material. Coming from making books, which are pictures in a series of pages, and then to move in, and with an element of time in it, and then to move into the computer and having moving images was a real natural step for me. In making collage, there's you use a lot of found images, and I rummage through a lot of the stairwells in apartment buildings and in the garbage and find pictures. And I did that when I was little. I really loved riding my bike down the alleyways and finding garbage things that I'd bring home. Most of my artwork is in the form of collage. And collage is a technique in making art, but in a broader sense, I think of it as a way of mentally organizing perceived information. And it has been a way for me to bring together complex and fragmented ideas into one field of vision. Visual images usually come from something I've written or something I've seen written. And in the writing or the reading, I imagine something. And I don't recreate what I'm seeing or imagining, but it starts something in motion. And it always ends up someplace else other than I would predict. And it usually goes through a lot of rough areas. It's a struggle. I struggle with my work. It's hard work. I put in a lot of hours. I'd work a lot alone. This project has been new for me because I've worked with other people and I've really liked that. I like what Max Ernst says in what he calls the spark of poetry, which leaps across the gaps as two realities are brought together. I like the idea of working in the gaps between. Reminds me of the synapses that work in the brain.